thank you so much for being on board the transatlantic. I've chased you. I never really personally met you, so I'm so excited today to cross your ocean. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you for having me, Simone.
Okay, so as you know, at Transatlantic, we believe that everyone is an ocean of erratic thoughts and wide feeling. And I'm quite sure that like your ocean must be fascinating. You have been everywhere, worked for a long time. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna go through the 7 questions of the 7 C's, and like hopefully we can like expose a side of you that many don't know. Okay, let's get to it.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Let's do it, man. First question. Okay, the very first journey of a ship is called like maiden voyage. This term was first recorded in 1901, but the use of the word maiden traced back to the 1500. This shows how important it is to define the very first time you cross the ocean. It's a very, very important moment. Now, your maiden voyage began in a historic agency, Cliff Freeman and Partner, back in 2001. What's the most important lesson you learned from that voyage?
Yeah, I mean, many important lessons. I think kind of your first experience into advertising teaches you many things to do and many things not to do, probably. For me, I mean, I started at Cliff Freeman the April before they brought home the Cannes Grand Prix for Fox Sports. And for the 4 years prior to my arrival and the 2 years after my arrival, Cliff Freeman would go on to be the most awarded advertising agency in the world. I actually went back and looked it up. The Gun Report had reported on this. So coming in as a junior copywriter, it's actually a very intimidating environment. I mean, these were like people who you idolized when you were studying advertising coming in, and now you were working amongst them. And I remember getting briefed on our first assignment, which was for a small space newspaper ad. This is back when people did newspaper ads for this little entertainment venue at Mohegan Sun called the Wolf Den. And for those of your viewers who are not familiar with the Wolf Den, which I would imagine most aren't, it would host acts like Tim McGraw or Gladys Knight. It was kind of the secondary venue of Mohegan Sun. So it wasn't even like the primary acts, yeah. So my partner and I, this guy, Aaron Adler, who I went on to work with for many years, we wrote hundreds of headlines over the course of a week, and then proudly walked into our creative director's office and wanted to share our genius. And then to which he simply said, none of these make me laugh. Do they make you laugh? And what can you really say in that moment other than, dip your head and walk back out. So we went back to the drawing board and eventually wrote, a headline that did make him laugh. And I don't remember exactly what the headline was, but I do remember how much longer it took than I thought it would.
Yeah, this is awesome, man. Harsh lesson.
And I think, well, I was just gonna say, I think that the big lesson that I learned was like, it's very easy to fall in love with your own ideas, but it's harder to make the world fall in love with them. And I think this was a big part of what Cliff Freeman was. I think it ultimately set the creative bar for me that I would carry with me my entire career. And I think everybody at that agency at the time, and many of them went on to run many very famous offices and networks and holding companies and all that good stuff. It was because there was this relentless pursuit of the best you can be. I think I just put like 4 different taglines together from different companies in that statement, but that was the truth. The truth was you can always be better than you think you can be. And like many artists, I think you really just run out of time. You don't really run out of the ability to make it better, and that's a really hard lesson, and it's a very hard way to live your life, and it's anxiety provoking, and I'm sure we'll dig into that in a moment if this is a proper therapy session.
Yeah,
but yeah.
You know, these harsh lessons remind me of like a lesson that I had like when I was back in Europe, like in 2001 when you started Cliff Freeman. I was working at Leo Burnett Milan, and you know, America was a foreign land for us. You know, it's like they weren't like as much as access to like the advertising. That's why I'm actually doing transatlantic right now, to give like a young kids like back in my own country and in Europe access to like legendary minds. And I remember stories from Cliff Freeman and story from like historic agency, and like, you know, what you mentioned as a tagline. I remember that we had a tagline up on the wall. It was like, you are as good as your last headline. And it was a tough lesson that we learned, but you know, those are the lessons that form you and like really like give you a backbone, like to be solid in the advertising business. So thank you so much for the first answer, man. Really good.
Of course, of
Second,
course.
the first 3 months of 2020 have seen a 24% increase in pirates attacks. Now, most people think of piracy as something that belongs to Jack Sparrow, 17th or 18th century, but pirates are a real threat today, and actually piracy is on the rise. Bridging this to advertising business, what do you reckon is a real threat when navigating the water of our industry?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's no getting rid of pirates. I think there's always pirates, and I guess I would say, to translate that back into ad parlance, I think the industry is always a bit under siege, and I actually think it's a huge part of what makes this industry so creative. You know, with each new innovation, we race to define a new list of, I think, best practices to take full advantage of whatever that last innovation was. And I think creativity drives the answers to those best practices. But the moment that kind of scale tips and they're labeled best practices, the competitive advantage that made them best practices, I think, in the first place, are kind of rendered null and void, because any brand can start applying them. They become universally known. So I think it's in these chaotic moments that it actually leads to the best practices, that the creativity actually thrives and the real business advantage is kind of unearthed. And then everything goes into parity again at some point. A new innovation emerges, and we kind of rinse and repeat, I would say. For me, I think my biggest fear would be when the industry stops thinking it's under siege and starts to stagnate. I think that would probably be the death, you know, of us all.
That's a legitimate fear, and it's something that I can truly relate to. And I agree on the word pirates. Like, you know, there is a lot of glamour in our, like, you know, industry. I mean, I was employed in in an agency, TBI Shade, which is like the pirate agency, and like, you know, and remember, like, you know, you were a Goodby, and like I just interviewed like Jeff Goodby, and I remember he's one of the most like fervent, like, you know, supporter of like being a vandal. And one of my former creative director at TBWA London was Steve Henry, coming out from the 70s, like, you know, the owner of HHCL, the agency, and he was a very fervent supporter of being a punk. So I feel like being a punk, being a pirate and a vandal is a good thing, but the threat that you are talking to is really like something that I hope it doesn't ever happen, but it's very dangerous as a territory. Thank you, man.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, so when I first started at DDB, it was very intimidating. I was sitting in Bill BERNBACH's office. Like,
oh, wow.
it's like when somebody hands you Jimi Hendrix's guitar and says, play me a little song.
Yeah,
like I, you know, at best I could play in a you know, subway platform.
Yeah.
And then the chairman at the time was Keith Reinhard, and he's still the chairman, who you know, had been around and had been the creative leader and the CEO at various times within DDB's history. And I talked to him about this a bit, and he said, look, Ari, like, you know, they told me when TV became so prominent, radio would die. They told me when the internet happened, TV would die. They told me when data happened, the internet would die. They told me, like, he's like, this is just the evolution. Like this is just the evolution, and our skills are in connecting with human beings. How we do that is constantly under siege, you know, and that's again, it's because we progress and we move at the speed of culture and all those good things. So it was just really interesting to hear it from somebody who had been around, you know, much longer than I had, and had so much experience, and yet we shared similar frustrations with kind of people always saying advertising is going to die. He said, I've been hearing that for 50 years. Like, yeah, maybe, but it doesn't seem like it right now. Yeah.
Good. Okay. In January 2007, at the age of 14, Michael Perham became the youngest solo sailor to cross the Atlantic. There is a fun fact. When someone asks him, how the heck did you do it? What's your secrets? He say, I got a shitload of chocolates. He had no idea how many calories you burn out there sailing solo. So now to cross the advertising ocean as you did, and you have a wonderful pedigree, you have been some of the best agency in the country, it takes some kind of like resilience, right? Now, I would like to know, what is your secrets? Don't tell me that it's chocolate, because I don't believe that you burn calorie when you cross the advertising business, but what is that thing that actually worked for you? Your secret weapon, if you will.
Yeah, well, look, I'll stick with your chocolate metaphor for a second, and I'll talk about a blend, what my blend is. So I would say, I think I probably have a 50-50 blend of insecurity and confidence, I would say. And it drives my wife absolutely crazy, because it's a challenging trait for a husband to have. But I think it suits advertising very well. The insecurity probably stems back to that previous lesson we spoke about how hard it is to actually impress people, to actually get them to want to engage in your work versus like just forcing it, I think, in front of them. Ultimately, I'm constantly in fear that people won't love what we do. And I think this pushes me ultimately to drive harder and harder. The confidence bit, I think, is a bit harder to explain, and it's something that probably just comes over time. I think when I first started, I was probably 90-10 blend of insecurity of confidence. And it's taken 20 years to get to 50-50. And I'm not sure if that's really fast or really slow. But I think it happened because I had a lot of incredible mentors, as you had just mentioned, through my career. And I think the one thing they all possessed was confidence. I think slowly but surely this confidence probably wore off on me. And I think it wore off on me because I saw that there was a method to their madness, and that really breakthrough creative actually worked for these clients, for the clients we were working on.
You mentioned sorry, please.
No, just to say, I think it was the repetition of this success that probably allowed the confidence to eventually rub off on me. And I think after enough times, it becomes clear that the success is not an accident. You just need to know like what to hold on to. And I think that's probably the most important metric as you rise the ranks from junior copywriter to global CCO is, you know, can you create breakthrough creative work that ultimately really works for your clients and drives their business, regardless of what agency you're at, what boss you have, what client you're working for, or even what medium, you know, you're being asked to work in. I think consistency is king in this business. And I think for me, that insecurity confidence blend is what has helped me deliver that consistency.
The insecurity confident blend is something super interesting and fascinating. Just yesterday, that's serendipity, I was watching like a series of video called Actors on Actors by Vanity Fair. And it was like Charlize Theron was like one of the guests. And she came out with this like definition about actors. She says like, we are actors, we are walking insecurities. Yeah. And it stuck with me because the blend of insecurity and confidence is always present in every artist, not just like, you know, we are not artists, like we are creative, like, you know, every human being has this blend. And I think like to master, as you well put this, like in percentage, 50-50 or 80-20, 70-30, like to master like the right balance is quite hard, and you need mentors. And like, you know, myself, I learned from like mentors, like that's hard work is the only secret they have. And like they work their ass off and they outwork you. And that's what truly like, you know, make the difference.
I mean, you spoke to resilience, and I think I was just talking with an old coworker of mine this week, and they were saying how, you know, they had thought they found a shortcut to a really successful route to something, and then it turned around and didn't turn out that way. And then this person reminded me, they said, oh, you always had this quote about how there are no shortcuts in advertising. It's just hard work. You have to do the hard work. And it's hard because I think as human beings, we want to find these shortcuts, you know, but advertising, you know, the longer I do this, the more I wish, you know, I'd come up with a great song, you know, 30 years ago that I could just keep playing. And I'm sure that has its own, and keep getting paid for. And I'm sure that has its own, you know, complexities as well. So it's easy to wish for it when you don't have it. And I'm far from comparing myself to any sort of musician, because I'm not. But I think it's fun, and we have to dance for our dinner every night. You know, you're only as good as, you said it earlier, you're only as good as your last idea. You know, this industry doesn't tend to reward you for what you did 30 years ago or 20 years ago or what have you.
Good. Look, there is a lesson that I just learned. Actually, it's a fact. If you want to cross through the Niagara Falls, the ships need to like bypass Niagara Falls. So to bypass the Niagara Falls, there are a system of 8 locks. A lock is like when the level of the water is brought to an even level, so the ship can like truly like make it like a bypass behind the Niagara Falls. Now, let's say a ship is passing through the creative ocean. If you were given the choice to bypass something that could potentially endanger you, what is the thing that you would choose to bypass?
I think I realize I'm setting myself up for a proper case study in therapy, but you know, I think I would say probably waiting. You know, I think there is an impatience to this industry that is actually quite beneficial, but we also do a lot of waiting. You know, we're meant to be an industry that moves at the speed of culture. Mm-hmm. And yet we get very nervous when we don't have time to think through every last detail. And I think the truth of the matter is that we can think through probably 70-ish% of most of the problems very, very quickly. I think it's that last 30% of how we think through the issues that can slow us down to a snail pace. And sometimes we might not ever get the answer to. Someone brought this quote to me a few years ago, and it's always kind of stuck with me, but or this theory that Colin Powell, who was the previous Secretary of State, had. And he had a very interesting theory that he called the 40-70 theory. And he would say that every time you face a tough decision, you should have no less than 40% and no more than 70% of the information you need to make the decision. And he said this because he said that if you make a decision with less than 40% of the information, you're shooting from the hip and you're going to make too many mistakes. He said if you make more, if you get more than 70% of the information, then the opportunity is usually passed and somebody else has already beaten you to the punch. And I think, I mean, he had much bigger issues at hand than we do in advertising. I mean, this is the Secretary of State, but I do think we can learn from it, you know, and I do think there is that sweet spot of misinformation and too much information, and making sure that you're kind of making those decisions within that sweet spot so that you can ultimately take advantage of what we do, which I think is moving at that speed of culture.
Yeah, that's a good answer. I'm still thinking about that kind of like waiting and moving at the speed of culture, that kind of right balance again. And I've been talking about balance a lot. And that was super interesting because I do think that the waiting, the action of waiting is something that is terrifying. And I guess like it's not by chance, like, you know, I'm going to be a case study for therapists too, but I think like to wait in front of an empty screen on a Zoom for someone to join, for instance, is terrifying, right? I remember there is this poet, still living, like a very, very good poet, Tony Ogland, and he's actually from the East Coast, and he had a beautiful like poems called like Sweet Ruin, and he talked about waiting. He talked about if you manage to put your life on pause for a few seconds, you will hear the noise, the cracking, the scratching of like, you know, everyday life. And that is terrifying. That's why a lot of people don't want to do it. And it's very hard to do it. And I think like in our business where we are so used to move so fast, when it comes to waiting, is something that truly like can like destabilize us. So
yeah.
Very interesting. Okay, cool. Fifth question, man. There are two types of truth. There is like a personal truth and there is like an objective truth. Now, if you look at the ocean, it's filled with objective truth. You can't bullshit the ocean. It's not something that you can just like, you know, made up, right? Now, the advertising business, I think like if we were talking about percentage between like personal true and objective true, oh man, personal true win, right? Our own work is very subjective. Like, you know, something that is good to you, it might not good to me. Something that sounds off to you, it might sound like funny to me. So in this ocean of personal truth and like, you know, what would be one objective truth that can stand solid in our business?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the funny part with our business is that it's ultimately one part science and one part art, right? And the science part is really nothing but objective. When we put together our strategies, they're always based on these objective truths. This is the science part. I think when it gets to the creative articulation or the delivery of this message, it gets a bit more into these personal truths you speak of. And I think this probably goes back to the consistency of success metric we were talking about earlier in this talk. If anyone could do this, like if it was just stripped down to best practices, there'd be no unfair business advantage in creativity, and the value of what we do, I think, would cease to exist. The objective truth, though, it comes in when we're talking about the creative articulation in advertising. It's the same as the objective truth when it comes to any form of art. And I would say that is when the art comes out, the world either loves it, ignores it, or hates it. You know, there's shades in there, but you get the point. And I think the same goes for advertising. So, you know, I've you know, as you would say it, I think I've had probably a lot of personal truths, you know, and theories throughout my career. And had they not been validated over and over again, I probably wouldn't be given the credence to have more personal, you know, truths, you know. So I think, and the same goes with artists, right? Like you can have a very stubborn artist that will go back to music again, put out an album, and the album sucks, and nobody's going to care, nobody's going to sign you, nobody's going to distribute your music, you know. But you come out and you say this is amazing, and the world goes nuts. I mean, I love these stories too, by the way. Like somebody was telling me about the background to Queen's Gambit, which you know was a fun show. My wife and I just tore through that one, and you know, as they were trying to sell this idea to many distributors, they were, you know, they got the answer that many of us would think they would get, which is nobody's going to watch a show about chess. You know, oh well, are you going to cut away from the chess matches? No, we're going to focus on the chess matches. We're actually going to spend, you know, a third of each episode on a chess match. You know, like, so okay, well, thank you for your time. You know, very good, but we'll be in touch. You know, this is I think the what you think they might get. But somebody, you know, saw it and they did it, and I have a feeling that whoever put together Queen's Gambit will have an opportunity to take another swing at another show now. And if they have the success again, then they'll have another one after that and another one after that. But this industry isn't terribly forgiving. I mean, you have a couple bombs, or you have a couple missteps, or you have a couple inconsistent years, and you're not given that opportunity anymore.
Right.
So it's something that I'm acutely aware of, and it's something that in a lot of the best work that we've created, there's a moment that goes, in any partnership, look, you've got to trust us. We're quite good at this, and if it doesn't turn out great, like, we know the consequence. Like this is not, it's not surprising. And if it turns out amazing, we know the other consequence, the positive consequence. So I think that's just a part of this business. And it's both part of what makes it so lovely, and it's part of what makes it so hard.
Right. Personal truth and objective truth is something that many other artists struggle. Like, for instance, like, remember, like, Quentin Tarantino always loved to say, it's like, Reservoir Dogs, like, became like a true project when Harvey Keitel came in, and talking about other artists, like, you talk about how, like, Queen Gambit was, like, sold. And, like, I remember, like, for instance, like, Jerry Salinger, before, like, writing, like, the greatest American novel, Catcher in the Rye, he actually spent an insane amount of time writing for the New Yorker in a way that the New Yorker will love his story. So he actually, like, fake his own style for a substantial period of time to get them to like him enough to gain his creative freedom. And I noticed that this is something that we also do in advertising sometime, right? Like in presentation, maybe, like, step by step, like we gain that creative freedom. So it's interesting how this balance, like, can affect the process.
Yeah. And the truth is, the truth is in how it works. Like you can't hide from this truth in advertising. That's again, it's both the joy and the horror of it. Yeah.
Okay, man. Okay, so the 5 oceans, the Pacific, Atlantic, Indian, Southern, and Arctic, are all connected. It's just one huge body of water. Now, I like to think that Mother Nature made, like, the ocean just one huge body of water because it truly want to give us a lesson and say it's like, no man is an island, to use a quote from John Donne. Now, you are the global chief credit officer of a massive company, DDB, that has, I don't know, like 200 offices around the world. So you are the perfect example for this metaphor, this analogy. Truly, like oceans for all around the world, but connected. Now, I'd like to know, what is the hardest challenge when you sit at the top of this, like, massive network of offices?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very interesting question, and it's a very timely question, because I think I would answer this in a pretty different way today than I would have answered it even 6 months ago. I think COVID has really taught us a lot about what it is to be a connected global network. I used to spend most of my time flying around to our offices to connect with, the agencies, the clients. And as you said, like, no matter where I was physically that day, I wasn't in 199 of the other places I needed to be in, right? In this remote world, I get all this travel time back, and I get time differences back. I get, client dinners back. And not to say those aren't all valuable. I think there's a balance here. But with that time back, I'm able to redistribute it back to the 200 offices. And I think it actually translates ultimately, and I think my wife would agree too, that I'm probably working 20% more than I was pre-pandemic, if not more. But I also would say that we're actually being 40 to 50% more effective than pre-pandemic. So the energy versus the return is very interesting in that connected kind of ecosystem that you speak of. And again, I don't want to suggest that I think we should stay fully remote forever. I think this industry thrives on feeding off personal energy, and I think we're all a bit desperate to get back and, nurse our wounds together and celebrate our victories and all those many good things. But there is going to be an optimal blend to when we come back. And I think we had been a little bit limited in our, in what we thought was on the table, in doing that. And, creativity is an incredibly connecting force. I think great ideas, nothing creates more connectivity, I think, than great ideas. And I think that's how you do it. But it's interesting. Like COVID's been a very humbling and exhausting experience, but it's also been a huge growth experience, I think, as most chaotic, stressful experiences
Absolutely, totally agree. It's like I've been living like COVID, like even before it began here, in the United States, because I have family in Italy. So
yeah,
definitely exhausting. Definitely there is a silver lining, and definitely taught us something that we may actually transport onto the future years. And I do believe that we underestimated the power of connectivity through ideas. So we thought that, we need to get on a plane to travel with our idea and put it in the backpack where they could travel on their own, they can buy their own tickets, they can fly on their own sky and get there before we get there. So
totally.
that's a good lesson.
Yeah.
Good. So last question, which is the question we ask to all our guests. And it goes like this: if there was a wind that blow your sail and you were to name it, what would the name be?
So I know sales are named quite simply, so I think I'll try to keep it to one word, and then I'll cheat and expand on it. But I would say, and it's cheesy, but I think it's true, which is love. I think feeling loved is what this is all about for me. And I think ultimately there's no better feeling in the world. I think again, it's been another big COVID lesson. I mean, the amount of time you get to spend with the people you love the most, which is your family, has been tremendous. But also, putting work out into the world right now, when you can't be around other people as much, and you can't connect with all your coworkers, and you can't have the victories, and you can't have the nursing of the defeats, putting work out into the world that still is appreciated, has been helping fill that void, helping fill that bucket a little bit. And I think that's been what's driven me probably through most of my career. And I think it's probably what drives a lot of creative people. I think they get into this because they want to feel appreciated. It's about attention and insecurities and all that good stuff. Again, I told you this would be a therapy session, and I think I'm sticking to it. But I want to be very honest, and I think sometimes we're not as transparent about that as we should be, because it's a very human need, and it's a beautiful need. It's a beautiful need, as long as you manage it healthily.
Yeah, I mean, look, up on the wall, I mean, you can't see in this room, but I have a huge sign that say love. So I love that word. I mean, and I should have another one that say empathy, because I think empathy is another key word that's COVID taught us, fortunately, hopefully, so yeah. Great ending with the word love to this interview. And man, I thank you so much. I know how busy your schedule is, so I appreciate every single second you give me to cross your ocean. Thank you so much, Harry. It was a pleasure and an honor.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, man. Bye-bye.